Top of the morning to you and welcome to our coverage of Israel-Hamas war. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Coming up on the program today, UN vote on Gaza aid delayed again. Israeli military says it uncovered an underground network in Gaza City. Plus, U.S. President Joe Biden not expecting new Gaza hostage deal soon. Thank you for joining us as the crisis in the Middle East continues. A United Nations Security Council votes on a bid to boost aid to the Gaza Strip and asked the UN to monitor humanitarian aid deliveries, and the Palestinian enclave was again delayed at the request of the United States. Security Council President for December, Ecuador's UN Permanent Representative Jose Javier Lopez Dominguez told reporters the presidency will do the adoption today. The text, drafted by the United Arab Emirates, aims to dilute Israel's control over all humanitarian aid deliveries to 2.3 million people in Gaza. Currently, Israel monitors the limited humanitarian aid and fuel deliveries to Gaza via the Rafah crossing from Egypt and the Israel-controlled Kerem Shalom crossing.
The Security Council has agreed to continue negotiations today to allow for additional time for diplomacy, and the presidency will schedule the adoption for tomorrow morning. Okay?
10 a.m.?
No, we don't know that yet. We're going to put it in the morning.
We are aware and are part of very high-level discussions that are happening between capitals to try and reach a text that will in fact be adopted. The overriding objective of this resolution was always to try and positively impact on the ground for the people who need it the most. We have been working overnight, hours, long hours. You have been here covering it, and we appreciate your patience with the Council. But we believe today giving a little bit of space for additional diplomacy could yield positive results, and we are going to be optimists and try and do that. Without going into too much detail, because these are Council deliberations, but I think everyone wants to see a resolution that has impact and that is implementable on the ground, and there are some discussions going on about how to make that possible.
Meanwhile, Chief Israeli military spokesperson Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari has announced that ground forces uncovered a network of infrastructure used by the Hamas leadership in the Gaza Strip. He was speaking in a televised press briefing on Wednesday. Mr. Hagari describes the underground network as the base for the Hamas leadership, such as Sinwar, Ismail Haniyeh, and Mohammed Deif through the Gaza Strip. Israel accuses the militant group of deliberately locating tunnels and other military infrastructure among civilians whom it uses as human shields. Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Deif are believed to be the masterminds behind the Hamas October 7 terror attack. U.S. President Joe Biden does not see any Israel-Hamas deal for the release of hostages held in Gaza being struck soon. Efforts are underway to try to arrange for the release of more hostages, with the heads of the U.S., CIA, Israel's Mossad, and Qatar's Prime Minister expected to meet and discuss the issue. Some of the hostages who remained in Gaza have been declared dead in absentia by Israeli authorities. The U.S. wants and expects Israel to shift its military operations in Gaza to a lower intensity phase, during which there will be more targeted operations focused on the Hamas leadership and its infrastructure. That's according to U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, who was speaking at a year-end news conference on Wednesday. Secretary Blinken added that once the shift happens, the harm done to civilians should decrease significantly.
You to believe that Israel does not have to choose between removing the threat of Hamas and minimizing the toll on civilians in Gaza. It has an obligation to do both, and it has a strategic interest to do both. We're more determined than ever to ensure that out of this horrific tragedy comes a moment of possibility for Israelis, for Palestinians, for the region, to live in lasting peace and lasting security. That out of this darkness comes light. Realizing that possibility will require all parties to make tough choices about the steps that they're willing to take, including the United States. We will test this proposition with the urgency and the creativity that it deserves and that America's interests demand. It's clear that the conflict will move and needs to move to a lower intensity phase. And we expect to see and want to see a shift to more targeted operations with a smaller number of forces that's really focused in on dealing with the leadership of Hamas, the tunnel network, and a few other critical things. And as that happens, I think you'll see as well the harm done to civilians also decrease significantly. We've said all along, and we have these conversations almost every day, that it is vitally important how Israel conducts its operations.
Meanwhile, U.S. Defense Secretary Mr. Lloyd Austin visited the Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier in the eastern Mediterranean and thanked its crew for what he said was their role in helping prevent a broader conflict in the Middle East during the Israel-Hamas war. The nuclear-powered Ford, a small floating vessel city of over 4,000 people with 8 squadrons of aircraft, became a powerful symbol of American resolve by rushing closer to Israel after it was attacked by Hamas on October the 7th. The Gerald Ford is the U.S. Navy's newest aircraft carrier. Its air wing has carried out more than 8,000 sorties, more than a quarter of them since repositioning to the eastern Mediterranean Sea after the war in Gaza began.
We're concerned about the conflict or the crisis spreading to the wider region. But to date, I think we've done a really good job of preventing that from happening, and we'll stay focused on that in the future. What the Houthis are doing affects commerce around the globe. Some 10 to 15% of global commerce flows through the Red Sea and through the Straits. So freedom of navigation is important to, again, countries around the globe. And I think we'll see increased participation going forward.
Israeli government spokesman Elion Levy welcomed the coalition formed by 10 navies to repel the Houthi threats. The Houthis, which control vast amounts of territory in Yemen after years of war, have since last month fired drones and missiles at international vessels sailing through the Red Sea, attacks it says response to Israel's assault on the Gaza Strip. Mr. Levy was speaking in a video conference briefing.
Welcome the international coalition of 10 navies to repel the Houthi terror pirate threat. This is a threat not just to Israel, but to global maritime trade, to the peace and security of international maritime routes. It is a global threat, and it is right that that be dealt with on a global level. And we thank our American allies for that forceful decision to secure freedom of navigation on the high seas.
Meanwhile, Germany is looking into joining the U.S.-led coalition to combat attacks in the Red Sea. Army Colonel Arnie Kolatz told reporters the German Navy's frigates Hessen, Hamburg, and Sachsen were designed precisely for that purpose, with a focus on air defense to protect a unit. Of the 3 ships, Kolatz says 2 are ready for battle. Shipping companies remain in the dark over the new international Navy coalition being assembled by the United States to combat attacks in the Red Sea, with many vessels continuing to avoid the area or canceling contracts outright. Britain's Defense Ministry has released photographs of what it says shows a suspected attack drone downed by Navy ship HMS Diamond in the Red Sea. Britain's Ministry of Defense said on Tuesday that HMS Diamond will join the U.S.-led international task force to safeguard commerce in the region. Alongside HMS Diamond, the task force currently includes 3 U.S. destroyers and a French warship in the region. They're operating in the southern Red Sea, focusing on protection of freedom of navigation, international trade, and human life by countering illicit non-state actors in international waters. The Houthis have stepped up attacks in the Red Sea in response to Israel's assault in the Gaza Strip, forcing oil major BP and freight firms, including Maersk, to avoid the area. And the leader of Yemen's Houthis is warning that they will strike U.S. warships if Washington targets the Iran-backed militia. Abdel Malik al-Houthi was speaking by televised broadcast. The crisis in the Red Sea has grown out of the war between Israel and Gaza's ruling Hamas, and this, the latest conflict in the Middle East, pits the U.S. and its allies against regional power Iran and its Arab proxies. Rising out of this development, the head of trade logistics for the UN's trade body is warning that disruption in the Suez Canal will have a negative impact on shipping costs and eventually lead to higher prices for consumer goods. Logistics chief Jan Hoffman adds that container shipping rates are now at an all-year high. The Red Sea is linked to the Mediterranean by the Suez Canal, which creates the shortest shipping routes between Europe and Asia. About 12% of world shipping traffic transits that canal.
Bad news, because it reaches us at a moment when we already have some other trends that have a negative impact on shipping costs. In our latest review of maritime transport, we had already shown that the average distance of shipping cargo is already at, we think, probably historically high. At least we have data since 1980, and the typical distance has never been as high as today for different reasons. And the container freight rates have also already gone up. They have gone up to the highest rate in 2023. So the latest container shipping rates, they are still low compared to the supply chain crisis during COVID, but they are higher now than they were at any other moment in 2023. I mean, the Christmas presents, they are already here. They are not coming now through the Suez Canal. So if you have systematically higher shipping costs for manufactured goods, the consumer goods that you and I buy in the shop, it takes many months to really translate into higher prices. But it will come. So if this situation continues, it will have a bearing also on the prices we pay in the shop for our consumer goods.
Channels Television's coverage of Israel-Hamas war. Coming up, Israel, Cyprus close to deal on maritime corridor for aid to Gaza. We'll have that story and more after the break. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Israel and Cyprus have come a step closer to agreeing on the creation of a maritime corridor that will allow goods to bypass Israel on the way to Gaza. This information was contained in a statement by the Israeli Foreign Ministry on Wednesday. According to that statement, the maritime corridor will allow for the direct transfer of humanitarian aid and goods to the Gaza Strip. If the corridor goes ahead as planned, it will be the first time Israel has eased its sea blockade on Gaza since it was imposed in 2007 when Hamas took control. On a diplomatic trip to Cyprus, Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen, along with Cypriot Foreign Minister Konstantinos Kombas, visited the port of Larnaca, which is situated around 370 kilometers northwest of Gaza. It is expected to be the starting point of the corridor. Our guest on the program today is a former lecturer on diplomatic and consular relations law, Nasarawa State University, Barrister Chukwuemeka Eze. Mr. Eze is right here with us in the Lagos studio. once again, welcome. Thank you for being here in person, and compliments of the season.
Thank you, Olumide. Compliments of the season to Nigerians and to the global community.
Indeed. And speaking of the global community, one of the actors in the United States is U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, who has said that he's looking and they're encouraging Israel to scale down its offensive to the point that it is more targeted at Hamas leadership and infrastructure pertaining to Hamas. Will this give a way of escape for Hamas leadership, as Israel would opine?
I think it goes beyond giving away to Hamas leadership. Israel is concerned about the tunnels. If that low-intensity attacks commence, that means they will be done with their business concerning the tunnels. And they are really interested to close those tunnels. I think that's why they are reluctant to stop this level of operation. But because the global opinion is quite against Israel. Recall the vote at the General Assembly on December 12th. 153 voted against Israel, 23 abstentions, and 10 voted in favor of Israel. And with that number, I think the other countries are very small countries, apart from United States and Austria. So the other ones are small countries, Liberia, Nauru, and all that. So basically, the world opinion is tilted against Israel. But Israel thinks it has a duty to close the many tunnels. It claims it has closed about, no, not closed, it has discovered about 1,500. And there is this report that there are up to 5,000 tunnels. So if there is cessation of hostilities, and some of these tunnels lie within civilian areas, it will be difficult for Israel to penetrate those civilian areas because it will seem as a violation of the ceasefire. So, because the devil is in the details, it is, but the world doesn't want anything that will make civilians to continue to lose their lives. As at the last count, there is a statement that is up to 19,000 Palestinians that have lost their lives, and about 70% are women and children, regarding the report from the Hamas-controlled Ministry of Health in Gaza. So, and you are aware that the Geneva Conventions of 1949, 4 of them, whereas the first 3 deal with combatants, the Geneva Convention number 4 of 12 August 1949 deals with protection of civilians. So the world will not sit back and allow civilians being mauled on a daily basis. And that's why whatever method Israel will use to achieve its purpose, the world feels it should not include harming of civilians. And they think the civilians have suffered enough, they're starved enough, and medical facilities that will take care of them are affected. So Common Article 3 of the Geneva Convention, the whole 4 conventions, this with protected persons, and that both those who are in the military but they are no longer fighting, and those who are what we call hors de combat, the wounded, the sick, those in detention, they are all protected under international humanitarian law. And as such, the world is concerned. You can see all the instruments that will allow this happen have been invoked. The UN Resolution 377A that was passed November 3, 1950 during the Korean War, which is called, that resolution is called United for Peace, a situation whereby the UN General Assembly can take certain measures where there is rancor within the members of the United Nations Security Council. It has been invoked. Article 99 of the United Nations Charter that was rarely invoked has been invoked. So everything is being done at the United Nations level to bring this war to an end. And I think as we speak, negotiations are going on to ensure that there will be cessation of hostilities, but the words are being worked out, because whereas majority of the nations want a lasting and sustainable cessation of hostilities, the United States wants the resolution worded in such a way that it will not handcuff Israel from achieving the purpose of the aftermath of the October 7, 2023 attack that left 1,200 Israelis killed, and many, about 243 taken hostages. So let's take it off from there. But
Speaking of which, the October 7 attack, something has been bothering me. A number of things, one of which is this. The October 7 attack, why hasn't there been pressure from the international community or the United Nations to bring those that conducted that attack to book? Because of the way and manner, not just the fact that they killed innocent civilians, but the fact that they killed them in such a terrible and a terrible way, for want of a better expression. Why hasn't there been that much pressure on Hamas to give up those people that went across into a sovereign nation, killed children, killed elderly people, killed young people, killed civilians, and took hostages back? Why hasn't there been like a resolution at the UN Assembly saying, look, Hamas, we understand the motive behind what you did, but what you did is a war crime for which they're now accusing Israel of war crimes in Gaza?
it can be taken in different dimensions, but let me take it from this dimension first before I go to the next one. Many nations, especially the Arab countries and the Organization of Islamic Countries, they see what Hamas has done as a fallout of the supposed occupation of Palestine. So they see what has happened as a symptom and not the root cause. That if the root is taken care of, that this happening will be remote. So they feel that it should be taken from its root by discussing about how the two-state solution. But for now, they think the protection of civilians should take preeminence. That when the dust settles, then we can take it to the next step. But to begin to hunt after Hamas while the war is going on, many countries don't think it should be the priority.
How do you think that is going down with Israel? What do you think Israel will do about this? This is the exact reason why Israel has been so belligerent in this attack in Gaza.
This is international politics. And there is this underdog rule. When there is a fight, many people tend to support the underdog against the champion. So, and look at France, that was initially supporting Israel and still supports in a way Canada. They're all on the same page that, with mounting civilian deaths, we cannot continue to support Israel, even at the United Nations. So for them now, when the civilians are protected and the amount of carnage taking place in Palestine, in Gaza, when it is stopped, then we can go into issue of investigation for war crimes, crimes against humanity.
But why isn't that done now at the United Nations level, Barrister, for neutrality purposes? Why isn't that done now? Why hasn't the UN said we're going to hold a resolution demanding that the hostages be released, also demanding that Israel withdraw, which they have done already, and Israel has lost that aside from the US vetoing it. They've demanded that Israel withdraw from Gaza. Why not, for purposes of neutrality, also demand that Hamas release those hostages by way of a resolution and bring those that committed those acts on October 7 to book? We're not talking about Hamas, the government in Gaza now. We're talking about October 7.
Sure. They are saying, majority of them are saying, that, in fact, in the resolution, there is a provision for release of hostages.
But not to the degree of...
Yes,
yeah.
There is a resolution for release of hostages. And in prioritization under international humanitarian law, protection of civilians takes a position that is superior to every other thing. So whereas release of hostages is an adjunct, but from the way you are speaking... Is
that fair?
See,
because the hostages are also...
International politics is not played on fairness. It is played on majority, vote. See, it is not played on fairness because if you go down from 1945 till now, all the actions they were not considered purely based on fairness. Now, as far as they are concerned, let civilians be protected. Remember
what about the civilians in Gaza right now? The hostages are 19 women, 2 children, over 100 men, over maybe a number of elderly. We saw
the negotiation for that
over 70 years of age. Those are civilians as well.
They believe the war should be ceased while the negotiation for that goes on. They don't think that the negotiation should precede the cessation of hostilities. That is to say, let us negotiate for release of hostages before we stop the war, because that's the approach of Israel.
Why not now proof of life of hostages? How about that? Because there's no proof of life of the hostages.
Basically, they think they will come to that, but they think these hostages, they are 100 and something.
127, now, according to the idea.
The population of Gaza, 2.2 million. And it is said that about 70% have been displaced. So do your weighing. In the balance, they think, let us first take care of, they are not saying so, but the purport of the whole resolution is that we should safeguard the lives of these 2.2 million and discuss about what will happen, how to release the 100 and something.
Do you think they're showing any concern for those hostages at all at the United Nations General Assembly level?
You recall that the United Nations Welfare Relief Agency has been working in Palestine for decades. And the United Nations has passed more than 131, as at 1989, about 131 resolutions against Israel.
Yes.
So you can see no country has received this number of resolutions against it than Israel. No country in the world. So United Nations has always been, after the partition, the United Nations resolution partitioning Palestine between the Israel and Palestine. Now, since then, United Nations has in various ways been more pro-Palestine than pro-Israel. And because they see Palestine as a weaker entity that should be protected. So it's not rocket science. The resolutions are all there. If not for United States, that of December 8, 2023 would have passed. You recall, out of the 15 members of the United Nations Security Council, only United States voted against that resolution. UK abstained, 13, including France, voted against Israel. And that is to tell you the amount of sentiment. The United Nations, it doesn't run on purely law or fairness or morality. They have certain information. They look at, these people need, and Israel, they see it as an occupational force. And that should be dismantled. So you don't expect the stronger...
The United Nations sees Israel as an occupational force?
Sure. Now,
in Gaza?
Yeah, in Palestine. In Palestine. So, and Gaza is part of Palestine. So you don't expect the United Nations to be making resolutions in favor of the strong against the weak.
Does that not then reinforce the argument that the United Nations has lost its position as a neutral body meant to prevent conflicts between nations?
No. It has not lost that. The United Nations has not lost that, but recall that the majority carries the vote, and there's what we call tyranny of the majority. So if you're a minority and you begin to wrap your head around why certain things, so if only 10 countries voted for you and 153 voted against you, I mean, you can make all manner of arguments. So, but does it mean that the 153 were wrong? So the important thing at this stage is that the resolution, which has been delayed since Monday as a result of negotiations with the United States of America to avoid another veto, it has to contain words that will suit Israel in this situation. So, and where you are going to concerning the hostages,
yes,
perhaps in the course of negotiations, that will be brought to the fore. But as it is, the important thing to the international community is that civilian lives be safeguarded.
The civilian lives of the hostages isn't important
it
to
is
the international
important,
community?
It is important, but in the order of priority, it should come behind the civilian lives of majority of the 2.2 million.
Why shouldn't it come first? It happened first before the Gaza
happened
attack.
First, but in the order of
and they remain in custody, and they remain. No one knows.
153 countries feel that it should come second. So if they are wrong, then 153 out of 190. In fact, those that voted, if you add it all, 186 countries voted. 23 abstentions, neither here nor there. So out of 166 that actually said yes or no, 153 said, this is what we want. Although it's non-binding.
Yes.
It's non-binding because under Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter, it is the United Nations Security Council, comprising of 5 permanent members and 10 non-permanent members, that we have a resolution that will be binding. And that's why after the vote of December 8th, we are talking about another vote, which may take place today or tomorrow, depending on what, I mean, the wordings of the draft resolution before the United Nations.
Paint for us a picture of a worst case scenario in this case of the withdrawal from Gaza demand resolution that was vetoed by the U.S. if Israel continues to maintain its position. What's the worst case scenario between Israel and the United Nations that could happen? Is it going to be a repeat of what happened between Russia and the United Nations?
I think it depends on the outcome of this vote. If the United States do not veto the upcoming resolution,
this one has to do with humanitarian aid,
sure,
specifically.
No, basically,
so it's not even as far-reaching as the withdrawal from Gaza.
Sure. The issue is not even, the ceasefire must come in one way or the other.
Okay.
Call it humanitarian ceasefire, call it cessation of hostilities. You cannot, United Nations cannot be supplying aid in the midst of war.
Oh, so you're saying that this will be a ceasefire. This resolution is hiding under it's been hidden under a cloak for a ceasefire to
certainly
occur.
One way or the other there will be ceasefire because if you allow the war to continue and you're supplying aid, definitely some of those vehicles will be hit. Some people
so they're trying to sneak in another ceasefire.
It's not even sneaking, it's there.
Wow.
It's there, but not lasting and sustainable ceasefire. That's the language that the United States is quarreling with. So they have to twist it in such a way to allow for situations where if the Hamas group counterattacks, then Israel will have the right of exercise its right of self-defense.
Okay.
So basically, they don't want a situation you completely handcuff Israel. And you heard Anthony Blinken saying that they should go into low-intensity warfare, targeting the leaders of Hamas. In that, if they do that, certainly that means there will be withdrawal to a large extent, and the situation whereby they go to hospitals, arrest medics to interrogate them, close hospitals, that will no longer apply. That will no longer apply. So basically, if the UN resolution passes, again, it will be easier for other countries to attack Israel if Israel reneges from the resolution. Because as it is now, without that resolution, if any country attacks Israel, that means that country will go into war with Israel. But if the resolution passes, Israel knows the consequences, because it will give room for other countries to legitimately attack Israel and enter into war with it. Notwithstanding what the Houthis are doing in Yemen, yes, which is not as a result of resolution of the United Nations Security.
And let's turn our attention to that now. The Houthis in Yemen, they have fired their own salvo, which is a warning, according to them, that if they see any activity, they will attack. Do they have the capacity to attack American warships? And now that there's a coalition, that these nations seem to be eager to help to police those waters, do you think that's it for the Houthi activity on the Red Sea in trying to stop vessels going to Israel?
No, it will not stop, because when you talk of Houthis, you cannot ignore the playmaster, that's Iran. Iran has sufficient weapons to give to the Houthis to do those attacks. And it will be a worse situation. I doubt whether they will be able, the coalition of 10 yes, will be able to protect all the ships that will be passing through the Red Sea. But the Houthis may eventually escalate it to the Suez Canal. You never know how far their ballistic missiles can go. And if that happens, the freedom of navigation will certainly be endangered, and it will impact adversely on world trade and world economies.
Finally, Bariseze, give us your overview of the situation as it remains. Are you optimistic or pessimistic of the outcome of this war as we reach the end of the year?
I don't think the war will end this year. The war will not end this year. It may take a different shape, but the war will not end this year, because Ismail Haniyeh was in Egypt to negotiate for cessation of hostilities and release of hostages. And he sounded tough. The Palestinian political leader, he sounded tough that they will not release the hostages. And Joe Biden is also saying that it is bleak that the hostages will be released. Internal tension in Israel concerning the killing of 3 hostages by Israeli soldiers and the non-release of the remaining hostages will continue. So Israel will never completely cease from the war when their hostages are still with Hamas. So this year will end without this war ending, except if Israelis who are hostages are released. That will reduce the local tension within Israel, and Israel will be more amenable to ending the war. But if that doesn't happen, I think it's a case of deja vu. I don't see a situation where the war will end.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We pray that that this finds a solution. We really thank you for your presence in the studios this morning. Barrister Chukwuemeka is a former lecturer on diplomatic and consular relations law, Nasarawa State University. Kefi, who is with me in the studios.
Thank you, Olumide. It's always exciting being your guest.
Likewise, on the other side. Now, still to come. Funeral held for Israeli soldier killed in Gaza. More details later. Please join us again. Welcome back. The head of the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, is calling the conflict in Gaza a moral failure of the international community and urging worrying parties to reach a new deal to halt the fighting. Although the ICRC facilitated the release of hostages, the group has been criticized by some Israelis for not doing more to have hostages freed. Some social media users have equated the organization to a taxi service to drive the hostages out of Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appeared to confirm last week that new negotiations were underway to recover hostages still held by Hamas after a source said Israel's intelligence chief met the Prime Minister of Qatar, considered a mediator in the conflict.
We have a situation that happens under our watch. I have started speaking of moral failure because every day this continues will be a day more where the international community hasn't proven capable of ending such high levels of suffering, and this will have an impact on generations, not only in Gaza but beyond Gaza, because these images remain. Nothing can happen without an agreement by both sides. There are certain modalities that need to be negotiated by them through intermediaries. That can be Qatar, and actually at the moment is Qatar. They have to agree on the steps, on the whereabouts where we can access the hostages, and we require the security guarantees. Events over the weekend have shown you that it's not only about our own security, our own staff, it is about the security of the hostages. And that is a given. There's no way around this. There's no silver bullet. There's nothing without an agreement by the two sides. So we urge them to keep negotiating and to keep facilitating the space that we need in order to operationalize the releases. And the releases in themselves are highly complex, highly sensitive missions. You don't just go there and take the hostages and bring them out. So any references to us being an Uber service or a taxi service are just beside the point. And I personally find them unacceptable and outrageous. I mean, our colleagues risk their lives, their safety and security during these operations, and the hostages are highly exposed while these things are ongoing.
Meanwhile, just days after Hamas kidnapped more than 35 young children and teenagers during its October 7 terror attack, youth psychologists and welfare experts in Israel began worriedly preparing for their return. The war in Gaza was in its early stages and the fate of the hostages was not clear, but Israel wanted to be sure that treatment protocol was in place when they came home. It was, however, uncharted territory. Few times in recent history have so many children either directly witnessed or been impacted by such violence or been taken captive. Professor Asher Ben-Areye, a specialist in child trauma at Jerusalem's Hebrew University and Haruv Institute, was tapped by Israel's welfare ministry to help identify the possible emotional trauma endured and came up with written proposals or protocols to cope with them. Schneider Children's Medical Center in central Israel received 26 freed hostages, 19 children, 6 mothers, and a grandmother. Clinical psychologist Dr. Avigal Sneer, who heads the hospital's PTSD unit, said that despite previous knowledge of treating trauma in children, the scenario of children coming back from captivity has posed new challenges.
Nobody in the world has ever witnessed or experienced or worked with such a big number of children that were kidnapped. There is one exception. The one exception is the Boko Haram incidents of the girls who were kidnapped in Nigeria, but there is no written research on it. The ministry approached us after the massacre of October 7. It basically introduced new forms of trauma for children and their families that we never witnessed before. We have, unfortunately, a lot of experience in shelling and in bombing and even in war victims, but we never experienced kidnapping of children. We never experienced the massacre of parents in front of their children. Big difference here that this is an organized event. And you need to explain to a child, how do you explain to a child that he is safe now when he's seen his safest place, his bedroom, burned and his parents murdered in his house, which is something relatively new that we need to deal with.
We do have, unfortunately in Israel, knowledge about treating trauma about helping kids overcoming symptoms of PTSD. When treating kids coming back from captivity from Gaza, we found ourselves dealing with a new situation. There is no documented research or clinical writing about kids coming back from captivity. We do know some things about adults, and we know some things about the needs of people coming back and transitioning after being held captive. But for the kids, we had to learn from scratch, thinking about what would they need, asking many questions ourselves, our teams, other people that we consulted with about the best way to welcome them, medically, psychologically, socially.
Dozens of people fled following an airstrike that hit near Rafah's Kuwaiti hospital, with the injured, being rushed into ambulances on Wednesday. It was not immediately clear how many people were killed by the strike, but footage showed at least 2 injured civilians in the aftermath. A thick plume of dark smoke rose in the air following the strike. People searched through rubble and debris in a house destroyed in the strike. A 18-year-old Ophir Engel, a freed Israeli hostage, revisited the scene of his abduction by Hamas and told how he was treated while held in Gaza. Young Engel was released after 54 days in Hamas captivity and on Wednesday spoke at the kibbutz Be'eri, which was attacked on October the 7th. Be'eri is about 2 kilometers from Gaza and was one of the sites worst hit by Hamas. Family members of other Israeli hostages also recalled the moment when their loved ones were taken by Hamas. Hamas killed 100 residents in Be'eri on October the 7th, almost 1 in 10 members of the kibbutz, and at least 30 are still missing, presumed taken hostage. More than 40 residential buildings, nearly a quarter of those in the kibbutz, have substantial structural damage.
Interned the house, 2 with guns, 1 with RPG. First thing, they shoot the dog. Then they took me into a black hole. The last thing I remember is being carried away, and Yuval, my girlfriend, say I love you. One of the most difficult moments was when the terrorists moved us twice in absolute darkness with non-stop booms all around us. I was there, and every moment the hostages are there is danger. They have no time. Why do I get to be here and they don't? They all have to come back home, now.
This place became the place where my dad was taken from, where my mom was taken from. I'm standing here now in these clothes, barefoot, because my dad was kidnapped from our home when he was in boxers and barefoot in his underwear. Because as you see here, it's a normal houses. We are in our kibbutz, our place. And he was in bed in the morning, and they just came into my home and took him. My dad are defenseless now. He have no weapon, no gun, no self-defense of any kind. And I'm just so afraid. I'm afraid that my dad wouldn't come back.
Finally, relatives and friends attended the burial and mourned an Israeli soldier who was killed in fighting in Gaza. Master Sergeant Maoz Fenigstein, 25 years of age, was killed amidst the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas. As of Wednesday, 466 Israeli soldiers have been killed since the Hamas attack on October the 7th, according to the Israeli government spokesman Elon Levy. And that's where we leave it on this morning's coverage of Israel-Hamas war as the crisis in the Middle East continues and the war has entered its 75th day. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Thank you for watching.